What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why you do not want to live on the US-Canadian border. This one kind of surprised me at first, and then the more and more I looked at it, I kind of began to understand. I think. I would think, at first glance, if you're living on the border or near the border, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can jump into the US, take advantage of things you need to do there, maybe go up to Canada, do whatever you want. Yeah, I'm starting to think it probably does not work like that, and it may in fact be a logistical nightmare to live. I mean, can you live literally on the US-Canadian border? What would that make you? That would make you something entirely new. Not American nor Canadian, but something in between, something more powerful. Maybe we wouldn't be able to stop you. Maybe that's the problem here. Why you shouldn't do... No, okay. But I am thinking there's probably just a bunch of little annoying things that might happen if you live literally on the border or near the border. I don't know, and that's okay, because I'm ready to find out. I'm here to learn about it. So let's take a look. Why you don't want to live on the US-Canadian border.
This is Point Roberts, a small city located on the Tsawwassen Peninsula. While it's only accessible by driving south from Canada, its location just below the 49th parallel actually makes it part of the United States. And for centuries, it was...
Oh. So... is there a lot of stuff like this? You can only get to Point Roberts because it's a... oh, what do you call that? A peninsula? Or the body of land that has three sides on water. Don't point out that I don't know what it's called. You can only get to that from going north to south. But it's below the border. Okay.
Below the 49th parallel actually makes it part of the United States. And for centuries, it was relatively accessible for Canadian and American tourists alike, as visitors and residents could pass through Canada to access the city uninhibited. The locals became dependent on its easy accessibility and lack of border restrictions to entice tourists to come indulge in its not quite Canadian charm. Now, that was all well and good until it got bad, and bad. After 9/11, and again during the pandemic, the US closed its border with Canada, completely straining the residents of Point Roberts.
Yes. This is the problem. It's technically in the United States, but in order to get out, the literal only way is through Canada. And when the border closes... okay.
Today, it's struggling to survive, with one news outlet referring to it as a, quote, ghost town in the making. Point Roberts' story, though, isn't unique. A myriad of towns along the US-Canada border have relied upon the absence of a secured border for centuries.
Oh, I was like, how? This is unfortunate, for sure, but is this like a big issue? I was like, this just seems like an isolated incident. No, apparently... this is happening a few times in these strategic little points along the border. That is unfortunate.
Stateless cities from Maine to Washington pride themselves on their diverse communities, but increasingly, their nebulous borders have presented new challenges for residents who are now separated from each other by the presence of a very real boundary. As early as the US's founding, its shared border with Canada has been subject to good old-fashioned fighting. As George Washington's signature dried on the Treaty of Paris, land surveyors got to work mapping the US-Canada, then called British North America, border established at the 45th parallel. In the following century, both countries realized that just...
that's kind of funny to me, that it's just the 45th parallel, like a literal straight line. You'd think it'd be more defined like other borders around the world. Every border you can ever think of is this jagged random line where a couple of people were just like, hey, that's mine. And the other person was like, okay, this part's mine. And then that happened a million times. I'm sure it happened exactly like that, too. And random borders were made, but this is just defined by a parallel. I don't know. It's efficient, for sure.
Drawing a line across a piece of paper wasn't the most reliable way of splitting a continent into two. So, disputes over land claims in Maine and New York slowed the process of figuring out the surveyor's chicken scratch for decades. The US even started building a military base in Canadian territory during the 1840s, which was subsequently named Fort Blunder and abandoned because the US would never build a military base in a foreign country. That would be crazy. But finally, The Oregon Treaty of 1846 brought the two countries together in agreement. They moved the US-Canada border to the 49th parallel, which allowed the United States to retain full ownership of Oregon, Washington, and all the hipsters contained within.
Okay. No, couldn't you have taken the hipsters, man? Canada, you could have taken them. No, we love them. So we kind of kept the 49th parallel as a border, roughly, and then in certain parts, east and west, we kind of went with some squiggles. Okay.
Ever since, Americans and Canadians have lived along this line in border communities. Point Roberts was originally settled by Canadian trappers in 1858 and has long been a
I'm sorry. I can't. I have to stop it again. Border communities? Are there communities of people that do in fact live so much on the border that half of the town is in Canada and half of it is in the United States? Is that a thing? And do they have like a yearly kickball tournament or like a what would be more hockey? No, hockey versus baseball. Yes, that'd be a good hybrid. Is that what we mean by border communities?
and all the hipsters. Point Roberts was originally settled, which allowed the United States to retain full ownership of Oregon, Washington, and all the hipsters contained within. Ever since, Americans and Canadians have lived along this line in border communities. Point Roberts was originally settled by Canadian trappers in 1858 and has long been a vacation community for nerds who only vacation in places created by weird surveying oddities. Though at one point residents wanted to secede from the United States and join Canada because they were sick of all their awesome freedom, it remains part of the US, even though the
Oh, I was wondering, like, what's happening in the modern day to this? Are we actually cutting it off at the tip and calling it the United States? That seems silly, to be honest.
town leases water from Vancouver and receives assistance from the Delta, British Columbia Fire Department. There's a number of border towns that share culture and community along the world's longest undefended border for a variety of reasons, including Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Sweetgrass, Montana and Coutts, Alberta, Sumas, Washington and Abbotsford, British Columbia.
Oh, so there are cities and towns on the border. It's just for some reason we either call it the same thing, like Sault Ste. Marie? What did he call this?
Along the world's longest undefended border for a variety of reasons, including Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and
Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan? Okay.
Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
And Ontario. Yeah, they just consider it two separate cities. It's kind of sad. Can't we just be one and just have like a giant proverbial line going through it or something? Or no line at all. Let's just unify. Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's just be one nation.
Sweetgrass, Montana and Coutts, Alberta, Sumas, Washington and Abbotsford, British Columbia, Derby Line, Vermont and Stansted, Quebec, and Blaine, Washington and Surrey, British Columbia. Some, like Niagara Falls, started as vacation towns for curious tourists and barrel enthusiasts in the 1800s, while others in British Columbia and Alberta attracted miners and entrepreneurs during the gold rush. These communities hold a certain pride in their stateless identities, not defined by nationality or citizenship, without a true border. Derby Line and Stansted even share the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, originally built by an American-Canadian couple in 1904, who met while living in the two towns and somehow overcame the massive cultural divide keeping Americans and Canadians apart. And though the US and Canada later charged the international
Wow, what a love story. So there really are communities living on the border and having love stories where Americans marry Canadians and share a library. I mean, that's pretty cool, to be honest.
Boundary Commission with clearing the border of any vegetation in a 6-meter, 20-foot radius in order to prevent any more Americans and Canadians from ever falling in love. Residents of border towns could still move freely between sister cities without passports or security checks.
Right.
The passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 further promoted the idea of a border-free North America. But 9/11 and later COVID-19 changed everything. At 10:05
Yeah, I was gonna say, so it used to be just like very loose, very like, okay, you can travel between the two countries, cross the border to get to your sister town or whatever, just easily, no one really cared. You didn't even need a passport back in the good old day. And now, everything had to get ruined.
a.m. on 9/11, the White House sealed the northern border with a Level 1 customs alert, something that had never been done before. All traffic came to a grinding halt, with lines of trucks and cars spanning 30 miles or 50 kilometers deep in some places. This shutdown reconfigured the US and Canada's border security measures and cut off Point Roberts from Canada entirely. While Canada tried to maintain an open and secure border with the US after the terrorist attacks, given that $1.9 billion in ketchup-flavored potato chips crossed it each day, the northern boundary became a hard line that no one could cross without identification.
Wow. I actually didn't know that the border between the US and Canada closed during 9/11. Didn't know that. But I'm guessing once that happened and the precedent was set that that was a possibility, that probably shocked a lot of people, and things were probably never the same once everyone was like, oh, this is a thing that can actually happen, and it screws up a lot of these communities when it does.
Which made it challenging for border communities to be the singular, cohesive entities they'd always been. With the US's new border security, border town residents became required to show identification to pass over the US-Canadian border, even when they were simply walking to the other side of town. While residents of Point Roberts had previously been allowed to pass through Canada without a passport or birth certificate, they were now stopped at each security checkpoint along the border, first while leaving the mainland, and then again while re-entering the southern half of the Tsawwassen Peninsula.
Oh, that is so sad. That's so annoying. No wonder it's becoming a ghost town. Like, no one's gonna do that.
So, whenever they want to leave Point Roberts to buy those messed up Oreo flavors that are probably legal in Canada, they're subject to car searches and border agents. And for towns all along the US-Canadian border, it's a hard pill to swallow. They're not these singular communities they used to be, and with the COVID-19 pandemic shutting down the border for much of 2020, these towns were divided once again.
Wow, this is actually sad. Like, this is serious. I've never had to experience this because I don't live on the US-Canadian border. But this is affecting thousands and thousands of people, thousands of families, I bet, that in a really tangible, real way are affected when the border is like under such harsh scrutiny like this. That's really unfortunate.
Point Roberts lost 80% of its business and could no longer welcome the hundreds of part-time residents that had previously padded its economy. While officials did allow a ferry from Bellingham, Washington to periodically visit with tourists, it wasn't enough to stave off the isolation or separation residents experienced. And though its border has now reopened,
That is so silly. Just make it part of Canada. This feels silly. That it's really hurting that part of the United States, I should say. Just make it part of Canada. Let the people not have to go through border patrol. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
stave off the isolation or separation residents experienced. And though its border has now reopened, the additional burden of COVID tests, entry forms, and vaccination requirements before entering Canada has made it even harder for border town residents to reassemble the shattered pieces of the boundless communities they once had.
Yeah.
Arbitrary borders are a big inconvenience in North America, but elsewhere in the world, they're the fuel that fires some of history's most persistent conflicts. Joseph from Real Life Lore covers many of these.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that the United States and Canada have the world's biggest unprotected border, I think is the way the narrator phrased it. We're just so, like, rock solid, like, sure that we're going to be cool. That the nations are just going to get along and be cool with each other, that we have like absolute trust, that it's just undefended, it's there, but apparently as of the modern day, super annoying to pass between.
Cases in his Nebula exclusive series, Modern Conflicts. It's really a show that exhibits exactly why Nebula exists. About controversial.
Wait a minute, this is an ad. An advertisement! I thought this was part of the video. He almost tricked me.
Up directly.
Oh, she's holding a credit card. Probably not. Probably doesn't have too much to do with the Canadian-US border. Oh, I think that's it. That's it. That's the end of the video. It was just an ad for Nebula. I still gotta say that was by half as interesting, and I liked that a lot. That was a really great video. Although, kind of sad there when you think about it. It essentially ended up teaching me that there's a bunch of beautiful border communities all along the US-Canadian border that are really getting the short end of the stick, as we say. Really getting a lot of bad stuff happening. With 9/11 and COVID and all sorts of regulations being enacted on the border. I'd like to know how real of an effect. It's like I was getting at earlier. Are some of these towns, some of them are sister towns, like one next to each other, that one is Canadian, one is American. I didn't think it would be set up like that, but I get it. I understand why you would do it that way. Are some just one that has been cut in half and they're really struggling? Or either way, sounds like it's super annoying and causing a lot of problems for these communities. So I sympathize on that. Seriously, I do. But without a doubt, this is a little more unexpected than what I thought when I first read this video title. I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just saying it's a logistical nightmare. But not only is it a logistical nightmare, it's really affecting people's livings and lives. So that's kind of sad. Anyway, if you found this video interesting as well, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada, Canadian culture, places, things, stuff there that I have never seen ever before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.